Welcome back from reading days. Hopefully you did lots of reading, I'm sure. Where things left off last time was looking at bicycles, and in part in honor of reading days and in part because I do it anyway. Just a few bits of review on the story of bicycles. It's, at least in class, it's mostly the story of stable and unstable equilibrium. So to remind you of that one, we've seen equilibrium before. It's zero net force. So an object that's experiencing zero, that's at equilibrium is not accelerating. Of course, it could be moving. That depends on what it was doing a moment ago, but it's coasting if it is moving. Stable equilibrium is a special kind of equilibrium, very common but special, where if you leave equilibrium, forces and or torques appear that push you back towards equilibrium. So the equilibrium is self-fixing. I'll go grab a chair and play with a chair. If you somehow go away from equilibrium, this is a stable equilibrium. If you go away from equilibrium, forces arise that push you back. Actually, they're forces, they're torques. It's really complicated. The overarching idea that makes it a stable equilibrium is that any movement away from equilibrium increases its total potential energy. So it tends to accelerate back towards equilibrium. Things accelerate in the direction that reduces their total potential energy as quickly as possible. So stable equilibria are places where the total potential energy is minimized, as small as it can get. It can't do any better, at least with small excursions away from equilibrium. This thing, of course, if you tip it far enough, it falls over. That's stable. Tricycles are typically in a stable equilibrium when they're just upright and at rest. The other kind of equilibrium that's interesting, that's named importantly, is an unstable equilibrium. So that's an equilibrium. Oh, I've got a room. Good. That's an equilibrium where, yeah, you're in equilibrium, but if you leave equilibrium, forces and or torques arise that take you forever away from that equilibrium. So this guy should have an equilibrium somewhere here. And it's right about there, but it's so delicately sensitive. The slightest misplacement from equilibrium, and it starts to explore the territory around equilibrium, and that's bad news, because it develops torques and or forces that push it the wrong way, away from equilibrium. And unstable equilibria are, this is not quite the whole story, they're maximums in total potential energy. There's at least a direction in which they can go that will reduce their total potential energy if they leave equilibrium, so they fall over. There are alternatives to being a true maximum, but there's an extra total potential energy trap, and it loves to get rid of that total potential energy by wandering forever away from equilibrium. So questions about those two equilibria. And of course, I should point out that a bicycle at rest sits, when it's upright, it sits in an unstable equilibrium. You can get it for a little while, but as soon as it begins to explore the territory around equilibrium, it discovers, oh, I can fall over and reduce my total potential energy. And so it does. So, why do we ride bicycles if they're unstable? They tend to fall over. It's because when they're moving, they're not so unstable. And the solution, they have a wonderful dynamic stability. And what they're doing is, I could first give you guys credit driving the bicycle, saying you managed to keep the bicycle upright by deliberately driving the line of contact between the front and back wheels with the ground. You drive that line, which is effectively the base of support for a bicycle, under the center of gravity of the bicycle. And the center of gravity of this guy is somewhere around here. And so you keep on driving you drive those two wheels so that they go right underneath the center of gravity of you and the bicycle, and you keep it upright. All right? So you can make an unstable thing stable with some work. Again, questions, thoughts? All right. Where this goes then is, well, why would you care to be on a vehicle that can tip over? And the story behind that is when you're moving, tricycle is dangerously unstable in motion. It has this tendency, when you're going very fast and you make a sudden turn, to have the tricycle itself drive once to the side and you go inertial. So it drives out from under you. You don't get enough force and or torque to make you accelerate with the tricycle, and it leaves you behind. It's like the cell phone on the dashboard problem that you have recently seen on the problem set. So what does a bicycle have that it helps you out? It has the ability to lean while you turn. And just to walk through that argument again, the idea, we're all riding the bicycle. And if you're heading along straight and true, and you begin to lean so that your head is toward the left, and that's all you do is lean to the left, you begin to fall over, head toward the left. That by itself is a terrible problem, right? You rotate, from your perspective, you rotate counterclockwise, and over you go. All right? So what if you're riding along again? They patch you up at the emergency room, and you're riding along, and now instead of leaning to the left, you steer to the left. You just suddenly turn the front wheel so the bicycle heads left. It drives out from under you, and your head stays inertial, and you fall over, head to the right. Ah! You basically rotate clockwise this time. Everybody following along, or tell me that if you're not, raise your hand, and I'll redo it. So if you lean without turning, we're all dealing with left. If you lean left without turning, you fall over, head to the left. If you turn without leaning, you fall over, head to the right. If you do both, they cancel each other. And that's what you do. When you're turning left, you deliberately tip yourself, head toward the left. So as you go around the turn, you're leaning. And the leaning is compensating for the inertia problem. Okay, when you're done the turn and you're no longer accelerating, you bring the bicycle back to upright. And this is part of what you learn when you never forget how to ride a bicycle. This is what you learn when you're first learning how to ride a bicycle. You learn these little tricks with the steering and controlling the lean so that you stay safe going around turns. Actually, you do this not only when you're riding a bicycle, you do it when you're just running. If you watch people running track, and they're going around literally a track, as they go around the turns, they're leaning toward the inside of the turns. They can't help it. If you run just dead straight up, and you go around the turn, your feet will make the turn, and the rest of you won't. You'll flip over towards the outside lanes, head toward the outside. If you lean without turning, you'll tip over towards the inside lanes. If you do both, you're safe and sound. And it's bicycle races, motorcycle races. If you ever watch motorcycle races where they really take corners extremely aggressively, huge inward accelerations, they lean over so far in order to get enough to balance these two opposing effects that they have to worry about actually rubbing their knees and their hips on the ground. So any questions about the leaning during turning trick? It shows up in all kinds of situations, but certainly in bicycles and also in running. Okay, so that said, the last detail here is, okay, so having a bicycle allows you to lean while you are turning, and therefore you can avoid the inertial problem of the tricycle. Anybody who's going to be riding quickly on a vehicle and making sharp turns, hard turns, would like to be able to lean the vehicle. This is not possible in an automobile, and it is a reason why you don't take turns in an automobile too aggressively. If you try to turn too hard in a car, you will flip it the same way as a tricycle flips. The top of the car will go straight and inertial, and the rest of the car will drive out from under it. And so this happens. From time to time, it happens to cars and trucks. So the truck flips over and all the oranges go flying out towards the outside of the turn because the oranges went inertial and the truck drove out from under them. Still, the fact that you can lean the bicycle leaves you with another problem. Still, is the delicacy of this whole thing. Obviously, you've got to get the lean just right and all of that. And even when you're going straight and true and not turning at all, you need to stay upright, and that requires this delicate, continuous driving of the base of support. Oops, I'm looking at the wrong spot. I'm looking down here, that's not where the issue is. It's center of gravity. I want to put my hand under the center of gravity. So you know, this is hard work. If you had to do this the whole time you're riding a bicycle, deliberately keep fixing your tendency to fall over, it wouldn't be fun. But the bicycle does it for you. So that's this view graph up here. The bicycle does it in two ways. I should say, what does it do for you? If you begin to lean, for example, now the bicycle is leaning towards you, what you want the bicycle to do in this circumstance, when it's leaning towards you, is you want it to steer towards its left, drive underneath you, and lift you back up. Can you picture that change? I can do it this way as well. Here we're heading away, and I accidentally lean the bicycle like this. It's going to be a disaster is looming. I'm going to hit my left side of my head against the ground. What do I want to do? I want to steer left and drive under me. So I'm back to upright. Any questions about that idea, that steering? It turns out you don't have to do this yourself. The bicycle wants to do this. And it does this for two reasons. One is, if you take the bicycle all by itself, right, even riderless, and I guess that's part of the point, is people who think they're so cool because they can ride no hands on a bicycle. If you just take a bicycle to a smooth hill and get it rolling down the hill, it will ride no hands, no rider. It'll stay up. Particularly a kid's bike. Kids' bikes are especially designed to be especially stable in this respect. They rescue the kid all the time very aggressively. So when the bicycle leans, it doesn't stay rigid. It flexes at its steering axis. That's the steering axis, right? If I lean it towards you, watch what happens to the front wheel. I hope you can see that. Coming along towards you, and I lean it to my left, your right. It steers automatically. Why did it do that? It's because making that flexure, doing that bend, allows it to lower its center of gravity slightly. It's getting rid of total potential energy. It's the same old rule. Trying to figure out all the forces and torques involved in this would be horrible. It's a simple matter, though. If you look at where the center of gravity of the bicycle is, it's got a certain altitude above the ground. When you tip it, it can get a little lower, just a smidge. And that causes the steer. And it's the right steer. It turns the right direction to rescue you. And 30 or 40 years ago, a guy in England set out trying to design bicycles that you could not ride. I mean, how could you play with the bicycle in such a way that it would become unstable in motion? And he eventually figured out how to make a bicycle. He made a bicycle that when you tip it like this, it steers the wrong way. It involved really changing the fork structure. I mean, it's an interesting story, but not too much TMI or something. But he made it so it steers the wrong way when you tip it, and you could not ride the bicycle because it had none of that. It had none of that stability you're used to, and wow, magically it just became horrible to try to keep upright. So, any questions about this automatic steering effect? One more to go. There's a second automatic steering effect, and it has to do with the front wheel. When that front wheel is spinning, it has angular momentum. And when you tip the wheel subsequently, the ground begins to push up on the wheel, not toward its center of mass, that is its natural pivot, but it misses the center of mass. So we've got just a front wheel here. So we have just the front wheel. When it's just riding along straight and level, everything's right. the ground is pushing up on the wheel with the support force straight towards the center of mass of the wheel, and there are no torques on the wheel. And whatever angular momentum it has, because you're riding forward, just stays perfectly unchanged. But if the bicycle tips, then the force from the ground isn't, it's still straight up, but it misses the center of mass. It's passing along this direction. This is where the force acts. It's twisting the wheel to trying to make it rotate, tip over basically. And that's a torque on the wheel. It's a weird direction for the torque, but it is a torque on the wheel for time. That's a transfer of angular momentum. It's an angular impulse. So when the wheel is just spinning upright, everything's simple, the gravity is pushing right at the center of mass, the angular momentum is constant. But when you start to tip the wheel, the angular momentum of the wheel begins to change. It begins to receive angular momentum from this upward push from the ground. You okay with that part? And weird thing happens to the wheel. It pivots. It begins to pivot like this. It's a motion known as precession. It's associated with gyroscopes, which used to be common toys. Probably 100 years ago they were common toys. Now there's probably, there's an app for gyroscopes, all that silly stuff. I will show you this weird effect. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to get the wheel spinning like crazy as though it were heading forward, the bicycle going to your right. And then instead of pushing up on the wheel down here, I'm going to pull up on this ring by hanging the wheel from a string. So I hang it there. So that's going to pull up on this part. This wheel will experience a torque due to the string yanking up on it, as opposed to the ground pushing up on it. It's the same story. And the wheel will begin to pivot. It's called precession. Okay? Spin, spin, spin. Woo, ramming speed. Woo. Whoa, this guy's hopping. All right, I'll get my tie caught in it, and that'll be that. All right. Here's the pivot. So its angular momentum, I put in angular momentum. Its angular momentum is changing in direction because of this upward pull, which is equivalent to the upward push from the ground, and causing that pivot. That pivot's a steering motion. That's the steering motion of a bicycle, and it's in the right direction again. It rescues you. This effect shows up in your front bicycle wheel. Ooh, let me stop this thing before we get in trouble. It's packed full of energy. I got to get the energy out. How do you get the energy out? Turn it into thermal energy. Sliding friction. All right. You've seen that. That effect's wild and crazy, right? But you've seen its influence in the real world frequently. When you drop a handful of change on the floor, and change is basically like little wheels, right? Dimes, nickels, quarters. We're talking not square currency. I don't know if anybody has square currency, but the coins roll across the floor for a very long distance. If you just try to stand a penny on its side, it's tough. You can do it if you've got a new penny and a very flat surface. But mostly they tip over. But if they're rolling, they steer themselves the same way. It's like this guy. Like, why is it staying up so nicely? It's doing that precession trick. It's angular momentum. Every time it begins to tip, the angular momentum begins to change, and it steers under itself to rescue itself. So that's why all these things that you drop that are round roll forever. They're automatically steering. Woo! Okay? So your bicycle does both of these tricks. It pivots the steering axis to lower its center of gravity, and it pivots its steering axis because of these torque effects and the transfer of angular momentum to the front wheel. And they will both work together. They're both active in any normal bicycle. Which one's the most important? Hard to say in advance. Depends on exact design of the bicycle. But that is why it's so easy to stay upright on a bicycle. It self-steers under your center of gravity, and it rescues you endlessly. Any other questions about bicycles? All right. So that takes us to rockets. And rockets is actually, it's a simple story. And I mean, there are lots of details, and we'll get into a few of them. But the basic idea is, how in the world does a rocket propel itself forward? Nothing seems to be touching it, and yet it can pick up speed in any old direction. And to lead into that, just my opening question here is just, when you've seen rockets take off, manned space type stuff, peopled space, they're launched from the ground, and you see this big, tremendous plume of flame and smoke shoot out the tail of the rocket, toast the launch pad and so on, and up goes the rocket. It's pushed upward by what's known as a thrust force, just to define what that word thrust in the question is. So there's an upward thrust force acting on this rocket and its engines, and the question is asking then, what if there's no launch pad? What if, I mean, something's holding the rocket so it doesn't tip over, but there's no base to the pad, nothing for the tongue of flame to touch. How would that affect the rocket's ability the force that's lifting the rocket upward? You okay with the question? Questions about the question? How many think that the thrust force would be approximately unchanged? How many think that it would be about half what it was before? How about 0? Useless. Okay, so I would say the majority are going for, a small majority are going for unchanged, a few for half, and a larger group for 0. So what does push the rocket upward? I mean, I could wait and, yeah, I can wait for a second. We'll come back to it in a second. It's only a question or two away, a slide or two away. Rockets seem to ride these tongue-like flames, so it's rare that you've seen a rocket take off with nothing coming out its tail. Usually it's incandescent gas, just glowing like crazy. Rockets can accelerate straight up. There are some planes that can do that. That would be pretty exciting in a commercial airplane. Picking up speed in the vertical direction. Certainly fighter jets can do this. They need a pretty tremendous upward push, and rockets usually are able to get that. They obviously can go very fast. The fastest things we know how to make. That's a little overstatement. The flame only touches the ground initially, which should already be a concern to those of you who are worried that maybe removing that launch pad bottom is going to spoil the rocket's ability to go anywhere. Rockets can apparently operate in empty space where there's not even no surface to push against, but there's not even air. So it's, what's going on here? The last thing is an issue of sort of stability. What's the orientation of a rocket? Most of them that you watched, at least during the launching process, have some sort of nose, and the nose tends to point in the direction. They tend to go in the direction the nose is pointing. I mean, they're certainly related, those two. Okay, so the first question that we come to of the 6 that I've got here is, what pushes a rocket forward? And this is directly related to that opening question I asked. And the answer is, the rocket is pushed forward by its own exhaust. So this is the true action-reaction story. People talk about action-reaction in way too many contexts. Some of them just sort of common language, which I guess is fine. But this is the real action-reaction part of physics. If you push on something, it pushes back equally hard in the opposite direction. Remember that? That's Newton's third law. You can't get around it. It's there. So if you push on something, it pushes back. That means if the rocket pushes on whatever it can find, well, the ground will be great. But if it can't push on the ground, it can push on stuff that it has on board. It can take the furniture and throw it out the back. The act of pushing on the furniture, that nice 3-piece setting, you give it a hard shove towards the tail of the rocket, it can't help but push back on you equally hard in the opposite direction, give you a hard shove towards the nose of the rocket. And that's what the rocket is basically doing. It's not, guys, it's not throwing furniture out. It's throwing chemicals it had on board, stuff it had on board. It's throwing it out the tail as hard as it can possibly throw it. An issue limited only really by, I mean, some technical issues, but primarily energy. The act of throwing stuff out the back as fast as possible consumes lots of energy. It carries off the fast-moving junk flying out. Carries away a lot of energy, so off it goes. We can look at this process. Oh, so I guess I should show you. And I was going to use a cart, but I've come to think that these wheelie chairs are so smooth. It's probably better than that cart. So here I am on my rocket. Whoa! Let me get to rest. Here I am in my rocket, and it's time for launch. I'm not going to launch vertically. I'm going to go sideways. I look around for stuff to throw out the tail of the rocket, having brought on not much fuel. Oh, I've got this medicine ball, which has got a fair amount of mass to it. I want to throw it as hard as I can in that direction. Whoa! I started to lose it, so I threw it before I was ready. Ah. This is always a slightly unconvincing demonstration because I can never throw it hard enough to really whiz across the room. I guess I should bring one of you guys up here and throw you away. Really unconvincing. Jeez. Come on. All right, we'll try the do not stand sign. I gotta wait till I stop. A little bit. That's the idea. Well, before I show you we can do better, and I'll have one of you be the one who does better, we can look at this two ways, which are equivalent. The physics is the same, but just spoken of differently. The act of pushing on the medicine ball. If I push on it, it pushes on me. So I send it to your left. It pushes on me, makes me go to the right, supposedly. That's just the sort of the equal but opposite forces way of looking at it. And because I have more mass, that's certainly the problem here. If I only were just this big, oh, look, here we go. Off we go. Since I have more mass, I go slower because I respond less to the force. That's the sort of the force way of looking at it. The other way to look at it is in terms of momentum. That I started together with the ball. I started with zero momentum. The two of us as a group, as a team, were motionless and momentum of an object, which we were. We were one object, is our mass times our velocity. And the velocity was zero, so no momentum. And what I did then was, by pushing on the ball to the left, I gave it leftward momentum, and then I therefore ended up with a deficit of leftward momentum. I guess I can animate this since I can't pull it off in real world. So I started zero momentum, right? We're a team with no momentum. Mass times zero velocity. When I throw it, whoosh, off it goes. I gave it leftward momentum. And since momentum is conserved quantity, we're not touching anything, approximately, it's carrying away leftward momentum. I must have the missing opposite momentum. So that together we have no momentum still. We start with zero, we finish with zero. It's just distributed funny. It's got leftward momentum. I've got rightward momentum. Together we have a grand total of none. Is that okay? Are questions about that idea? We've taken the momentum we started with, zero, and we've redistributed it. It had the negative 37.5 units. I ended up with rightward 37.5 units. Together, zero. All right? Well, with that as an observation, the more momentum it takes away with it toward the left, the more momentum I end up with to the right. And since its momentum is its mass times its velocity, I want that stuff going off to the left to have as much mass as possible and as big a velocity as possible. Right? And I can only throw the ball, not very fast. But there are other things that can throw stuff faster. And the thing that I have in mind is this. I guess I can leave it. It's a CO2 canister from a fire extinguisher. It is not normal CO2 canister. The CO2 canisters for fire extinguishers come with a fitting on the outlet that makes sure the gas goes in all directions so that it doesn't develop any momentum in any particular direction. And years ago when they were refilling these cylinders, so they sawed it off. And they sent it in to be refilled, and the people there went, oh, it's defective, and they fixed it. So it had to be sawed off again. So now I think they're better at managing to keep that fitting from reappearing here by accident. But when one of you squeezes that valve, and plan to volunteer, it will allow the tiny gas particles that are sitting in that canister minding their own business to go roaring out to your current left at like 200 miles an hour. So they're going to carry away a lot of momentum to the left. And the result is the astronaut here is going to go off to the right accelerate quite rapidly to the right. You understand the physics behind this? Does it matter whether we're near the wall or not near the wall? No, it's the act of throwing the little guys out the door. It's all that matters. What they do after that, that's their business. They hit the wall, fine. Volunteer? Maddie, who happens to be a firefighter, so it's appropriate. This is what you don't want to have when you fight fires. And we got earplugs and face protection, but realistically you don't need them, unless you're desperate for them. So what you want to do is sit on the platform without touching anything. I mean, obviously the ground, that is. And I'll pull out the safety there. You can have. You actually want to face the other way because you want to see where you're going. Because you will have to stop yourself. And when you're right, it's going to be very loud. When you squeeze it tightly, a plume of gas will go out. Make sure you stop in time. Okay? Go for it. Yay! Thanks. So that really is rocket propulsion. No flames, and it's actually cold coming out there. But it was the act of throwing the gas out the tail. We can actually do one more trip. It's not the strongest trip. One more volunteer. All right, it's gonna be me if no one. Okay. Michael. Liam, sorry. Screwed up again. All right. Have a seat. It'll run out of oomph partway down the, so just give it a good hard squeeze. This is the leisurely, this is the budget trip. Thanks. Yeah. Yay. Okay. So the act of throwing stuff out the tail of the rocket is what propels it forward. The goal in trying to go as fast, if your goal is to go as fast and as high and everything as possible, you want as much mass as possible to throw out the tail, and you want to be able to throw it as fast as you possibly can. These guys are coming out at a couple hundred miles an hour, the carbon dioxide. It started as a couple of kilograms, probably, of carbon dioxide, went blasting out of there in a couple of seconds. In a real rocket, when they do a couple of things, one of them is they start the rocket with a huge fraction of the launch weight being fuel. So whereas this rocket was mostly people most of the mass was in the astronaut. In a real rocket, they arrange it so that most of the mass is actually fuel at launch. I mean, some of the goals are like 90% fuel. Just a tiny portion of the overall rocket ultimately makes it into space because they need to throw so much out the tail. And they want as much energy as possible in that fuel because along with carrying away momentum, it's going to be taking a lot of energy to go fast. And so they use the most incredibly pyrotechnic chemicals, just stuff that is just chock full of chemical potential energy. And the exhaust, the speed at which the exhaust goes blasting out the tail can be as much as 5 miles per second. It's going really fast. And that only gives them enough forward push to make it into orbit and beyond. So let's see, look at bits and pieces. I mean, yeah, if you look at the, why pick as much fuel and as fast as you can go? The momentum that ends up in the ship, if you make it's sort of a naive view of how the rocket works, the momentum in the ship to the right is equal to the momentum in the fuel to the left. So get as much momentum in the fuel to the left as you can. How do you do that? Have as much mass in the fuel and have as much velocity as the fuel as you can get. You'll end up then with a lot of momentum in the ship. If the ship has very small mass, then to carry that momentum, it has to go very fast. It's all good. You get with the rocket ship traveling off at crazy speeds. All right? This then comes back to, just to finish this question. If there were no launch pad below the NASA rocket launch, the upward thrust of its engines would be, how many think approximately unchanged? Okay, we're done. That's the answer. I don't want to, yeah. Yeah, the presence or absence of the launch pad has barely any effect. It's the act of throwing the fuel down. To go really fast, to get the super fast exhaust speeds that they need in order to make a good use of their precious fuel, they use very high energy fuels. They burn at tremendous temperatures, and then they take the thermal energy that's released by the burning process, and they do their very best to redirect the movement of the thermally excited atoms and molecules so they all go in one direction. There's issues of thermodynamics and stuff we'll deal with later in the semester. You can't get all of the energy that's in thermal form out as work, but you can get a fair amount of it out if you've got a hot region and a cold region. The hot region is the burning fuel. The cold region is the great outdoors. And in the act of letting heat flow from the tremendously hot flame to the great outdoors where it's cold, they can take even thermal energy, even that, what I've claimed is that sort of useless energy, they manage to get it together and get all the particles to moving as best they can, within limits, in one direction. And that involves the engine pushing those molecules in that direction, and they push back. So the engine ends up being pushed, as I'm waving my hands here, the engine's pushed to the right as the fuel goes to the left. And they use a carefully designed nozzle. You've seen these nozzles. They're called de Laval nozzles. There's an issue of the gas. It is gas. It is a very hot gas. This gas is still undergoing chemical reactions, so it's self-heating and glowing and all that. They managed to get that gas going so fast that it's actually going faster than in the speed of sound in the gas. It's just roaring through the narrow neck, and then it continues out and it further speeds up, going out the tail. It's a huge, the story behind the engines is itself, it's interesting to physicists, to me, not even all physicists. De Laval, just for giggles, was also the person who invented the homogenizer for milk. So to homogenize milk, you need to just really stir up the little droplets of fat, and you go through nozzles like this. Anyhow, that's obviously not the story. Okay? Having said all this, let's see other rockets to play with, since we don't want to run out of time before all the rockets are done. Okay. This guy we don't need. I showed you the carbon dioxide fire extinguisher rocket. One of the kinds of rockets that you can go after, you can buy at the toy store and not get arrested for launching, I never got arrested for, well, it wasn't rockets, it was bombs. But, God, the one that got me, I didn't even explode. The fact that I was testing it in front of the junior high school was probably part of the problem. But my dog hated loud noises. Okay, so we've got water in this rocket, and that's the mass that we're going to throw out the tail. We've got energy stored in compressed air. 3 pumps is good. That's what it says. So 10 pumps is better. Okay, so it's packed full of compressed air, which will push the water out at high speed, and woo! So it propelled itself. I didn't do it. The act of throwing the water down, it caused the rest of the thing to go up. We're all okay in that? The next kind of rocket. This is a match rocket. I don't even know this one. Okay, yeah. If you wrap aluminum foil around a match properly, where's the head? This is a different design than I'm used to. Al made this. You can get all the burning flame from a match head to go out. The tail is a rocket. Let's see. I'm going to assume this is, whoa! Or not. Failure to launch. Quick, call launch safety or whatever. This is actually a cannon, so this is not a rocket. So, why not? This has, a rocket is a special case. It uses the fuel it has on board to throw out the tail. It cannot get any more. Once it's sorted out, it's gone. Once all the furniture is going out the tail, you can't go to IKEA. So you have to be careful with it. Precious. It's very precious. That's in contrast to an airplane. An airplane's throwing stuff backwards too, as we'll see. But it's the stuff that's passing by. It's the air. And you can get more. So an airplane has an advantage over a rocket in that it doesn't have a precious reserve of mass that it can throw out. It can get more mass, the passing air. So that's the difference between a rocket and an airplane. The airplane has more mass available to it. A rocket has a second disadvantage, that as it's throwing stuff out the tail, it begins to accelerate. So some of the stuff it throws out the tail, later in its flight, it has already brought up to high speed. So it's like you throw out the first deck chair, whoosh, out it goes. Second deck chair, whoosh. Third deck chair, you're already moving this way. It already has some forward momentum, and you're going to throw it away? The act of that you're throwing the stuff out continuously as you're picking up speed means you're not using the fuel that you throw out late in the launch as efficiently as you could. Wouldn't it be nice to have thrown it out at the beginning when you weren't moving? So it can carry away as much momentum as possible. There was no investment of forward momentum in that fuel. And a cannon is the limit where there is all the fuel is consumed at once. So there's no issue of having to use fuel late in the flight that you've already invested forward momentum into. So this cannon, yeah, looking at a loaded gun, what can I say? Supposedly, you shove this guy in there? All right, I've never done this one. If I disappear in smoke, have a good semester. Oh, and the propulsion, firecracker. Boom. I know better than yeah, I'll go look in it now. Doesn't matter. Another day we'll worry about that. Okay, this is a better one. There's a string that some of you may have noticed that goes to the back of the room. And sitting on that string is a bottle. The bottle has just air inside, and the cap's on, and a hole's been bored through it about 1/4 inch in diameter. And we'll use everyone's favorite rocket fuel, Ultra Hold hairspray. It's about a 1 second blast or less. That should be do it. let it evaporate in there. So this is now going to be full of fuel-air mixture, really ready to burn like crazy. And when it burns, it's going to go out that tail very fast. And the good thing is, you can do it again. Fresh air. Sorry, I know from experience that it's a little, you want to get it really clean. It's sitting there holding matches under it and having nothing happen is really kind of tedious for everybody involved. We took it to greater height, because years ago it was about this height, and I had one of the divers from on the diving team lit it from like this, and the cap blew off, hit him in the shoulder, and you could see for like weeks he had this nice welt here. That's good. Letting it evaporate. Woo! Okay. So this is rocket propulsion. All the other stuff is just details. We'll call it a day. If you want to come launch rockets, go for it. All right. See you on Friday.